LindaSlayten. LindaSlayten lived in Lakeland, which is a city in Florida. Tim, who was 12 years old, and Jeff, who was 15, were her two sons. Judy Butler, Linda's sister, visited them for morning coffee on September 4th. Judy, however, discovered her sister's body when she arrived and immediately dialed 911. Linda was discovered on the bed with a wire loop around her neck. She had been suffocated and beaten. The cops had to break the bad news to Linda's two boys when they arrived on the scene. They urged Jeff to get ready and go outside since he was dozing off in the living room. Many police officers, TV teams, and Jeff's sobbing Aunt Judy were waiting for him when he stepped outside. The awful events were then described to him by Judy. Tim was still in his pajamas when a police officer roused him up in the second bedroom. Tim passed the locked door to his mother's bedroom. The door swung open as the officer stepped out of the room. At the horrific crime scene, he then witnessed everything that had taken place. Investigators believed that someone had broken into Linda's room through the window since the screen had been removed. On the windowsill, there was a palm print as well. Additionally, a male whose name was unknown had his DNA extracted from Linda's body. To determine if Linda's family or friends were responsible, investigators dug into her past. They observed Linda's former spouse, Frank Slayten, whom she divorced in 1974. Frank had a reputation for being a violent drinker who had mistreated Linda in the past. Investigators looked for a connection between him and the crime, but they were unsuccessful. They had an interest in LindaSlayten's son, Jeff Slayten. The investigators spoke with Jeff multiple times, but they were unable to assemble sufficient evidence to establish his involvement. Joe Mills, the 20-year-old football coach at Tim's high school, was also investigated. After her divorce, Linda struggled to make ends meet and was unable to purchase a vehicle. Mills, therefore, drove Tim to and from football practice each day. However, Mills and the crime site had no apparent link, according to the authorities. The Lakeland Police Department's fingerprint expert, Sergeant Edgar Pickett, painstakingly examined every aspect of the crime scene. After the accident, Jeff and Tim moved home with their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris, and he discovered a palm print on the windowsill, which was kept together with Linda's DNA, except for Grandpa Harris, who manned a rifle and kept watch outside while they slept. They rarely ventured outside and lived in perpetual anxiety. A few weeks after Linda's funeral, the boys returned to school and decided to concentrate on football. In order to keep in mind the lesson his mother had taught him, to keep going and never give up. Tim hung a picture of his football team on his bed. In more recent years, Jeff and Tim have admitted that they still feel sad and terrible about missing something that night and being powerless to save their mother. Detectives assembled a complete DNA description of Linda's murderer in March 1999, but they lacked a match. Detective Brad Grice took over the investigation in 2001. He obtained DNA samples from many people of interest, including Jeff and Tim, to once more exonerate them. In order to find out what happened to their mother, Grice promised the boys that he wouldn't retire. However, none of the samples matched the DNA from the crime site, and Frank Slayten also provided a DNA sample. Detective Grice learned in September 2001 that Jimmy Ulmer, a 24-year-old man, had attempted to harm a 10-year-old child by yanking her out of a bedroom window and nearly killed her. Ulmer received an 80-year prison sentence after being found guilty of this. The vicious assault resembled Linda's ordeal quite a bit. Additionally, Detective Grace learned that on the night Linda was murdered, Jimmy Ulmer was staying with a friend who also happened to live in the same apartment complex. Detective Grace, Jeff, and Tim were confident they had the right man. Ulmer's mother offered Grace a DNA sample, but he passed away in prison in 1996. It was a major letdown when his DNA did not match the DNA found at the crime scene. They appeared to be back where they had been before. Detective Grace oversaw a brand new cold case unit by the year 2005. She requested that the FBI continuously query all government databanks using the DNA profile. But the years passed without a parallel. Due to health issues, Detective Grace was forced to retire in 2015. He was therefore unable to honor his commitment. However, there was still some optimism because, in 2018, cutting-edge DNA technology started to thrill the police. Genetic genealogist Cece Moore decided to take on Linda's case. She is widely acknowledged as an expert in the area of genetic genealogy research. Moore uploaded the DNA sample to the public genealogical website GEDmatch. Then, branch by branch, she meticulously assembled the perpetrator's family tree. She looked at birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, and social media to add names to the family tree. According to Moore, she discovered 3 pieces of the perpetrator's family tree, which helped her identify the most likely culprit. According to her, the 3 genetic networks combined to form a single family tree. Despite hundreds of leads, dead ends, and possibilities that had been investigated and ruled out, Cece Moore managed to find the man in just one weekend. Coach Joe, real name Joseph Clinton Mills, picked up and dropped off Tim at practice. The cops wanted to be absolutely certain before alerting the boys. According to Cece Moore's final report from 2019, Joseph Mills, who was 58 at the time, lived in Kathleen, Florida, roughly 30 minutes away from the scene of the incident. Russell, Hurley, and Tammy Hathcock were the next team of Lakeland detectives to work on Linda's case. When the officers then reviewed the original case files, they learned that Mills had initially only been interrogated for a short time. Mills informed them that he had driven Tim home and was unaware of Linda's whereabouts. Detectives learned that Mills had created a phony will and had been found guilty of grand theft in 1984. Despite the fact that he was never arrested, his palm and fingerprints were obtained. Detectives compared the palm prints to the one Sergeant Pickett had taken from Linda's windowsill almost 38 years earlier in August 2019. It went well. The most likely culprit, according to cutting-edge genetic genealogy, was Mills. A vintage palm print served as identification. A fresh sample of Mills' DNA needed to be compared to the DNA that had been discovered at the crime site by detectives Hathcock and Hurley. This DNA dates back many years. They sneakily brought Mills' trash back to the police station. A used piece of medical tape was discovered, and it was forwarded to the crime lab at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for analysis. 11 days later, the test results revealed that Joseph Mills was responsible for the death of LindaSlayten. Finally, she was able to inform her sons Jeff and Tim that the monster had been apprehended. Tim claimed to have admired Coach Joe, and that the fact that he had kept this photo of him for so long made him sick. Even worse, Mills continued to drive Tim to and from practice after he killed Linda. On December 12, 2019, Joseph Mills was detained by police. He was carried away, but he didn't protest or ask why, nearly as if he understood the reason. After the arrest, Tim and Jeff visited Sergeant Edgar Pickett, who is now 94 years old, to personally thank him for obtaining the palm print all those years ago. On all counts, Mills pleaded guilty when he was sentenced in 2022. The individuals who had a connection with Linda were curious about Jeff's court question to Joe, asking him, "Why did you snatch up my mother?" "I adored my mother. Could you please provide me with the reason?" Mills's response, claiming, "I'm a good guy," angered everyone. Cece Moore expressed gratitude towards the initial crime scene investigators, acknowledging that they had no knowledge at the time of the crime that DNA would be utilized in criminal investigations. Moore further mentioned that she felt misrepresented as someone she is not. The fact that they gathered it and then stored it responsibly and securely for so many years is crucial. Jeff and Tim say they are determined to move on as best they can and live well for their mom and their families. The brothers also know that without each other, they would not have been able to get through what they went through. They are still very close and only live a few miles apart. One of their favorite things to do is fix up old cars. Flora Stevens. In 1975, Flora Stevens was living in Sullivan County, New York. She was 36 years old at that time. She worked at the Concord Hotel. On August 3rd, 1975, she got married to Robert Stevens. Robert took her to the Community General Hospital in Monticello, New York, for a meeting with a doctor. When Robert came back to get her, she was gone. He said she was lost when he couldn't find her. Detectives looked at the case from time to time to try to find Flora, but they were never able to find any tips. On September 15th, 2017, a New York State Police investigator told the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office that unidentified skeletal parts had been found in southern Orange County. The woman whose body had been dumped had some of the same general traits as Flora, and the detective hoped that DNA from any live relatives could help identify her. Instead, the detectives found that someone in Massachusetts was using Flora's Social Security number. Detectives used the Social Security number to find a place in Lowell, Massachusetts, that helps older people live on their own. Staff at the center confirmed that the number belonged to Flora Harris, who had been there since 2001. Investigators chose to talk to Flora, who is 78 years old. When they got there, they found that she has dementia and can't say more than 1 or 2 words at a time. She did know that her room ID from the Concord was hers. Officials were able to look through Flora's medical records and find out that she had been in a care home in New Hampshire and at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital in Manhattan about 30 years ago. Because of her illness, it is still not clear how, why, or where she went after she left Monticello in 1975. Authorities have been frustrated because they haven't been able to find any live relatives. Flora said, "Me," when she was shown a picture of herself when she was younger. When she was shown a picture of her husband, Robert, she said, "Robert." This helped investigators prove that Flora Stevens and Flora Harris are the same person. Robert never learned what happened to his wife, and he passed away before he could. Gabriel Nagy. Gabriel Nagy and his wife Pamela, son Stephen, and daughter Jennifer lived in Sydney, Australia. When Gabriel was a young boy, he moved to Australia with his parents. He loved living there. He was a loving father, and his family admired him and couldn't think of anything that could ever come between them. But something bad did happen. Gabriel worked as a shop fitter, which meant that he helped businesses build stores all over the city. He wanted to be an accountant, though, so he went to school to get there. On January 21st, Gabriel had to do some things in the city. He told his wife Pamela that he would be home for lunch by calling her. Pamela cooked food for her husband and waited for him to come home. She waited until she got a call that would change the rest of her life. Gabriel's burned-out car was found on the side of the road by the cops. No trace of him could be found. Pamela and her 2 kids started putting up flyers all over Sydney for the lost person. Someone must have heard what happened to Gabriel after the car crash. Sad to say, no one knew. Sydney is about 100 miles from Newcastle, and the police learned 2 weeks after Gabriel vanished that he had taken money out of a bank there. The new piece of information gave Gabriel's family hope, and they thought it would help them find Gabriel. But the lead led nowhere, and the case was closed for another 20 years. The Australian Medicare system showed that a person named Gabriel Nagy had eye surgery recently, and the records also showed that the man went by the name Ron Saunders. Georgia Robinson, an experienced senior constable, promised herself she would figure out what was going on, and in 2012, on her final attempt to find Gabriel, she did just that. This man, whose name is Ron Saunders, because he saw a sign for Saunders Beach in Queensland, Australia, while he was just walking around, was called by Officer Robinson. He told her that he didn't remember much about the last 20 years of his life. He was homeless most of the time and just moved from city to city. That was the case until a preacher named Barry Hayo met Gabriel. Gabriel was hired by the minister to take care of the church. Gabriel's head was severely injured in the car accident he was in, and then he went into a state of confusion that made him forget everything about his life. Robinson flew to Gabriel's home and showed him pictures of his family. As time went on, he started to remember more and more. Gabriel said that what was happening was not real. He still couldn't remember everything about his family. He promised to stay in touch, but he just couldn't go back to living with his family. Carlina White, Joy White, and Carl Tyson are the parents of Carlina Renee White, who was born in New York City on July 16, 1987. When Carlina was 19 days old, her parents took her to the hospital because she had a fever. The parents were reassured by a woman dressed as a nurse, but Petway wasn't actually employed at the hospital. Petway believed that she could steal a baby by pretending to be a nurse at the hospital. There was video security in the hospital, but it wasn't working at the time, so Joy White and Carl Tyson were the only ones who could describe the woman. A guard said that at 3:30 a.m., a woman who fits the description left the hospital, and that there was no baby in sight, but that the baby could have been hidden. Petway took off her IV line and took her away. When Carlina White was taken from a New York hospital, it was the first time that anyone knew of Carlina was raised in Bridgeport, Connecticut, by Petway under the name Nedra Natty Nance. About 45 miles away was where her parents lived. Carlina went to Thomas Hooker School and then Warren Harding High School, where she got her diploma. Petway and Carlina went to Atlanta, Georgia, sometime after that. In her teens, Carlina began to think that Petway wasn't her real mother because she couldn't show her a birth certificate. Carlina was pregnant in 2005 and asked Petway for the birth certificate so she could get health insurance. Petway then got a fake birth certificate from Connecticut. When Carlina tried to use it, the people in charge told her it was fake. Petway finally told Carlina that she wasn't her real mother when she was confronted by her. Petway did not tell Carlina the whole truth, but she did say that a drug user had left her. When Carlina was 23, she used websites like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There, she found pictures of the stolen Carlina White that looked like baby pictures of herself as Nedra and of her daughter, Samani. Carlina chose to call the center's hotline, which helped her find her birth family. In January 2011, DNA tests proved that she was Carlina White, who had been lost. After it was proven that Nedra Nance was really Carlina White, the FBI started looking for Ann Petway. On the morning of January 23, 2011, Petway went to the FBI office in Bridgeport and turned herself in. Petway admitted to federal agents that she had taken Carlina because she was stressed about whether or not she would ever be able to have children after having several miscarriages. Ann Petway, who is 50 years old, got 12 years in jail on July 30, 2012. The judge said she was selfish and gave a couple the worst fear that a parent could have. Petway did her time at the Federal Correctional Institution, Aliceville in Alabama, until April 14, 2021, when she was freed. Not everything went well when Carlina saw her parents again. Money, the fact that Carlina still wanted to be called Nedra, and her feelings for Ann Petway all caused problems. But the last public updates show that Carlina seems to have made peace with her folks and that everyone is now getting along. Nguyen Thi, then 16 years old, was a student in Hanoi, Vietnam, in 1992. She was very attractive, and many boys liked her. She couldn't focus on her schoolwork, so she spent most of her time with her friends. On one of these nights, she returned home after curfew, but her mother wouldn't let her in. That night, Nguyen vanished. Her mother, Vutiha, felt very bad about what she did. After Nguyen and her friends were turned away from their home, they went to a singing bar where they met a woman named Tan. This woman took Nguyen and her friends to a bar close to the border between China and Vietnam, where they drank all night and sang songs. The next morning, Nguyen woke up to find herself and her friends being held captive in a house in China. The woman forced Nguyen and her 3 friends to wed Chinese men. She begged a Vietnamese driver who worked at a farm close to her house to help her. After she told him everything, the driver came up with the idea to hide her by putting her in a cage with pigs in the back of his truck. Before taking a taxi, they drove for 70 miles. They went another 100 miles until they reached the border between Vietnam and China. After saying goodbye to the cab driver, Nguyen and the truck driver continued on their way to the border for another 3 months. At the border, they met a cab driver who, since they had no money, took them across the border for free. Nguyen was afraid that her family had died when she got to Vietnam. It had been 21 years since she was last seen. But the truck driver told Nguyen, if your parents died and your family doesn't accept you, you can come back and live with me. With that promise, Nguyen went to find her family. She asked a lot of people for help because Hanoi had changed a lot since she had last been there. Surprisingly, her own uncle was the 6th person she asked. Her uncle dropped the bunch of vegetables he was holding and ran to his sister's house. She didn't believe him at first, though, until she saw her long-lost daughter for herself. Since 2010, there have been over 3,000 cases of human trafficking in Vietnam, according to the Ministry of Public Security, with the majority of the victims being women and children from underprivileged and rural areas who were sold to men in China, Malaysia, and South Korea who desired wives or simply wanted to have children. Between July and December 2018, China collaborated with Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam to save more than 1,100 women who had been abducted into the country. Petra Pazsitka. Petra Pazsitka was 24 years old and studying computer science at Germany's Braunschweig University. She went to the doctor on July 26, 1984, and then went to a store to buy a printer cartridge for her younger brother Karsten's birthday. Petra also asked Misha, her next-door friend, to take care of her plants while she was gone. She had planned to go to Wolfsburg to see her folks for the holidays. Petra told her parents how excited she was to spend the holidays with them, finish her schoolwork, and take care of her younger brother. Her family was looking forward to Petra coming home, but she never did. At first, they thought she had stayed longer at the university, but there was no sign of her there. When she didn't show up to Kirsten's birthday party 2 days later, her parents said she was lost. The cops then started a huge search. Her absence was also talked about on TV, but no clues were found. The cops didn't have much to go on, so the case went cold. In 1985, a 19-year-old apprentice carpenter named Gunter K. admitted to killing Petra and a 14-year-old girl. But the cops didn't believe him, and they found that he had nothing to do with Petra going missing. In September 2015, 31 years after Petra went missing, the case was finally solved. Petra Schneider, a 55-year-old woman, called the police to her Dusseldorf apartment to report a break-in. When the officers asked for her identification, she finally admitted the truth and identified herself as the missing girl from 31 years prior. She claimed that she planned her escape very carefully and that she doesn't want to speak to her family despite being found. She didn't have a visa, a driver's license, a bank account, a doctor, a dentist, or health insurance. Petra saved up 4,000 Deutsche Marks, or about $2,000, to pay for her trip away. She tried to stay away from everyone and mostly kept to herself. If someone hadn't broken into her room, the case might have gone unsolved. Since she went missing, she had been living in different places in Germany under the name Petra Schneider. The police tried to get Petra and her family back together, but she is adamant that she doesn't want to see them again. Tell me in the comments if you think Petra should have let her family know that she was safe after she left. Her father passed away a few years ago, and when her brother and mother learned the news, they were shocked and crying. Denise Bolser. Denise Bolser, a 24-year-old woman from Raymond, New Hampshire, worked as a bookkeeper. On January 17, 1985, she went missing, and the only clue was a note left behind. Her husband found the note saying, "We've got your wife." A few days later, her truck was found at Logan Airport in Boston. Inside, her important documents like her Social Security card, birth certificate, and credit cards were neatly arranged and untouched. Initially, authorities suspected kidnapping, but they couldn't find strong evidence except for the note. Later on, they considered the possibility that Denise left on her own, but her family believed foul play was involved. After a year, Denise was charged in absentia for embezzling $12,000 from her workplace. The case remained unsolved for 17 years. In 2002, the FBI had a breakthrough and believed they had located Denise, now using the name Denise Jones. She was still working as a bookkeeper and had started a new family. At 42 years old, Denise was thrilled to reunite with her family. She explained that her former boss had wanted to harm her due to the embezzlement, claiming the actual amount embezzled was closer to $100,000. The charges against her were dropped because her former boss had passed away. During her time missing, Denise lived in different places like South Carolina, the Bahamas, California, Hawaii, and settled in Florida in 1996. Her current husband was surprised but noticed that things that were unclear before now made sense. Denise always seemed sad on Mother's Day and appeared uneasy during holidays. She never talked about her family. Craig Williamson. On October 7, 1990, Craig Williamson and Christine Reinhardt exchanged vows at Lake Tahoe, California. This was their second marriage. Christine expressed that being married to Craig felt like being on a honeymoon. She mentioned that even though they had known each other for only a month, they realized their love for each other instantly. According to her, she had never come across someone as loving, honest, and compassionate as Craig. Their plan was to raise tilapia, an exotic and tasty African fish, and sell it all over the country, which would be a good way to make money. They bought a farm in Christine's home state of Wisconsin, Clintonville, and started fixing it up right away. They added on to the barn, put in big tanks, and started raising tilapia. Craig fixed up an old school bus so that it could carry the fish. Craig rented a car when he got to Colorado Springs so he could go to work meetings. On August 30, at 9 p.m., the night before he went home, he and Christine spoke on the phone for the last time. On August 28, 1993, Craig packed up and left to sell the fish in Colorado. Christine was concerned about him driving because he had gotten a headache 4 weeks earlier and was still getting headaches and having trouble seeing. 2 weeks later, Craig's rental car was discovered abandoned in Juarez, Mexico, which is just across the border from El Paso. There were no clues about where Craig was or what had happened to him around or inside the car. There was no evidence of wrongdoing. Craig went missing when he was 1,000 miles from the farm in Clintonville, Wisconsin. The next day, his credit cards were found at a store 675 miles south of Colorado Springs in El Paso, Texas. Christine could have stayed at home or waited for police in distant towns to call her back, or she could have taken action herself. On September 14, 1993, Christine went to Colorado Springs and put up posters stating that Craig was missing in the locations where he had been. Christine also visited the hotel where Craig had stayed the last time anyone had seen him, and a staff member showed her to room 112. In Colorado, the investigation was headed by Detective Robert Johnson, who took Christine to the location where the school bus with the fish was still parked. Christine believed that Craig had checked on the school bus, and while he was walking towards the rental car, someone struck him on the head. This made her state that his head was hit, and the person responsible quickly fled. She mentioned that instead of expressing his injury and seeking help, Craig would say, "I need to keep moving. I have things to do. I'm supposed to go somewhere, and I must return." Subsequently, he would wander off towards the parking lot and the bright lights of the interchange. The police and Christine were unsuccessful in uncovering any leads in the case for a brief period of time. Then, TV stations in Wisconsin and Colorado reported that Christine was seeking Craig after he went missing. Within a few days, a former Montana nurse came forward to describe what she had witnessed. Judy Inman, a retired nurse, worked as a nurse. She recognized Craig after seeing the news about his absence on television. Judy spotted Craig on a train traveling from Montana to Washington 2 weeks after he vanished. A messy-looking man boarded. She recalled that 2 inebriated persons were pestering the man when he boarded the train for the first time. She observed the man searching as he moved down the aisle. Then, he kept repeating that he needed to return to the fish. The man claimed that the fish were not from the United States and that they were maintained in a large complex with large tanks. Because Judy Inman formerly worked as a nurse, she was aware that the man had a problem. He wasn't inebriated or insane. She knew that, because she had previously provided care for patients with comparable issues. Judy was certain that he had sustained some sort of head injury. After hearing what Judy stated, Christine was certain that the man on the train was Craig. This was especially true in light of what he said regarding the out-of-state fish. Since they first met in Washington, she also assumed he was headed there. Christine assembled everything she would require for her trip to Washington before departing. Additionally, she assembled a backpack for Craig in case she came across him. Christine took a 6-week Odyssey trip from Whitefish, Montana, to Portland, Oregon, following the same path as Judy Inman's train. Christine shot pictures of the train stops at several locations along the path that Judy Inman and the man were traveling by rail. On December 26, 1993, Christine had her first encounter with Judy Inman. She displayed images of all the nearby train stations to the woman. Judy believed that the man who resembled Craig had arrived from Washington close to the Oregon border. She recalled the color of the building and that it was a modest structure. Christine speculated that Craig might have made a mistake by confusing Wishram and Washougal. In the 1980s, Craig resided in the town of Washougal. Craig's son traveled to Wishram and posted this flyer there, but he didn't discover any fresh clues. Craig was not located, which is unfortunate. Christine conveyed the difficulty she experienced upon returning alone to the Wisconsin farm after spending 6 weeks searching for Craig. She described the place as extremely desolate and freezing, and she encountered reminders of Craig everywhere she looked. She emphasized her unwavering determination not to give up, expressing her commitment to continue searching for him until either she passes away or he is found, whichever happens first. According to her, there were no other options available. She firmly believed that Craig was still alive and remained confident that she would eventually locate him. However, she acknowledged the challenge of not knowing when this would happen, which made waiting difficult. Due to the fact that Craig's credit cards were visible when he was last seen, investigators suspected that he may have staged his disappearance. They also noticed that his hired car contained beard trimmings. They had been sliced with scissors, which lab staff discovered, indicating that he may have been attempting to alter his appearance. When he vanished, he had about $2,500 in cash with him. In addition to spending all of their money on the farm, he and Christine also took out an additional $400,000 in loans to do so. Finally, it didn't seem like his bus was equipped with the necessary equipment to transport fish from Colorado. It was devoid of tanks, coolers, or fish food. On May 25, 1994, Craig vanished and unsolved mysteries covered the story. He was described as a 49-year-old man who was 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighed 190 pounds. He had gray hair and blue eyes. They also displayed Craig's TV clip. 6 months before Craig went missing, in February 1993, the video was captured in Wisconsin. Craig watched the show again and, in an odd turn of events, recognized himself. In July 1995, he was residing in Key West, Florida. He claimed that a month prior to going missing, he suffered a concussion that made it worse for him to lose his memory after being robbed in Colorado Springs. He added that he traveled aimlessly across the country up until Key West, where he found work as a diver. Christine soon heard from Craig and his ex-wife. It was unfortunate that he did not recall Christine or his family. Nevertheless, Christine and Craig reconciled after a few days. They afterward traveled to Colorado Springs in the hopes that they would find something there to aid with his memory. However, the trip was unsuccessful. They decided to part ways, yet they kept their friendship. Christine relocated to Wyoming to begin a new life, while Craig moved to California to live with friends. Detectives are skeptical of Craig's forgetfulness despite his claims that he can't recall anything and that he faked going missing. They believe he fled in order to avoid handling his new business and paying his expenses. We hope these stories have intrigued and captivated you, revealing the incredible lengths investigators and forensic experts go to unravel the truth. Remember, justice may be delayed, but it is never denied. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more intriguing content. Share your thoughts and comments below on which case surprised you the most.